What is this? Am I your prisoner now?
This is to protect you.
Protect me.
Then what do you want, Isabella? To go back to your apartment?
O'Connell! One more step and your precious doctor dies.
Let her go! I will not let you get hurt because of me, Isabella. Never. It's over. You're safe now.
The next morning, the silence in the penthouse was heavy and suffocating. Isabella awoke in a luxurious guest room, but it felt more like a prison cell. At the foot of the bed, a fresh set of clothes had been laid out for her. Jeans, a cashmere sweater, and undergarments. A thoughtful gesture that felt more like control than kindness. She found Killian in the main living area, staring out the window at the waking city, a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked as if he hadn't slept at all.
Good morning,
he said without turning around.
There's breakfast in the kitchen if you're hungry.
I want to go home, Killian.
Isabella said directly, ignoring his pleasantries.
I have to work.
You can't.
He replied, finally turning. His face was hard.
At least for a few days. Until I can be sure Moretti's people won't try something stupid. You're not safe.
So I have to stay here. Locked up?
She asked in disbelief.
For now, yes.
Killian affirmed. Their impending argument was interrupted by the ringing of Isabella's phone. She looked at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize, but it wasn't a private one. An official number. With a bad feeling, she answered it.
Talk to Isabella Rossi?
Asked a professional-sounding man's voice.
Yes, speaking.
My name is Detective Miller from the City Police Department. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding an ongoing investigation. Do you have time to meet this morning?
Isabella's world seemed to spin. The police. She glanced at Killian, her eyes wide with panic. Killian, seeing her expression change, immediately moved closer, gesturing inquiringly.
What is this about?
Isabella asked into the phone, trying to keep her voice from trembling.
We'd prefer to discuss it in person, Doctor. It's for your own safety as well.
Detective Miller replied. After agreeing to meet at a cafe near the hospital in an hour, Isabella hung up with a shaking hand.
The police?
She whispered to Killian. Killian's face hardened.
What did they say?
After Isabella explained, Killian thought quickly.
You have to meet him. Refusing will raise suspicion. But you're not going alone.
He took out his phone.
My lawyer, David, will accompany you. He'll meet you there.
Killian looked at Isabella sharply.
Listen to me carefully. You are a victim. You treated a patient from an incident. You didn't know who he was. After that, you were threatened by an unknown person in the parking garage. You were scared. You know nothing about my business or Moretti's business. Understand?
An hour later, Isabella sat in a cafe, ironically, the same one where Killian had met her, with a dapper-looking lawyer named David by her side. Detective Miller arrived right on time. He was a middle-aged man with a slightly disheveled appearance, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Rossi.
Miller said.
We received a report about an incident in the hospital parking garage last night. Can you tell me what happened?
With David occasionally interjecting to protect her, Isabella recounted the version of the story Killian had prepared. She was a doctor doing her duty, who was now terrified because she was caught in the middle of something she didn't understand. Detective Miller listened patiently.
So, you don't know the man who threatened you, and you also didn't know the man you treated that night, Mr. O'Connell.
I only knew he was my patient.
Isabella replied, sticking to her story. Miller gave a faint smile, one that held no amusement at all.
You seem to always be in the middle of a lot of coincidences, Doctor. Treating the Irish mob boss, then getting threatened by his rival. That's a very specific coincidence.
After a few more questions, which Isabella and David answered carefully, Detective Miller finally stood up.
All right, that's enough for today,
he said. He looked directly into Isabella's eyes, ignoring the lawyer.
A piece of personal advice, Doctor. I've been dealing with people like O'Connell and Moretti for a long time. They live in a storm, and they pull everyone near them into it. You seem like a good person. Get out of that storm while you still can.
The detective left, leaving Isabella with a chilling feeling. She was no longer just a pawn in the game of two Mafia families. Now the game board had expanded. The police were watching her too. The walls of her cage felt like they were closing in, pressing on her from all sides. Isabella returned to the penthouse feeling drained. The room that had once felt like a prison now also felt like the only hiding place in the world, a paradox that made her nauseous. Killian was waiting for her, pacing in front of the large window. When Isabella entered, he stopped and looked at her with concern.
How did it go?
Your lawyer is excellent.
Isabella answered flatly.
I followed the story. They can't prove anything.
She paused, then looked directly into Killian's eyes.
But that detective knows I'm lying. He gave me a warning. He told me to get out of your world while I still can.
The words hung between them, a truth spoken by an outsider, confirming what they both already knew. Killian's face hardened, not with anger, but with deep-seated guilt. He turned away, unable to meet Isabella's gaze. The following days were strange. They lived under one roof in an awkward ceasefire. Their explosive argument seemed to have created a chasm between them, but the threat from Moretti and the police forced them to be on the same side of that chasm. They ate their meals together in silence, exchanging necessary information about security and the latest news, but avoiding personal conversation. The silence between them was filled with unspoken words. For Isabella, this was torture. She was trapped in a gilded cage, unable to work, unable to contact her friends freely for fear of being wiretapped. She spent her time reading medical books from a tablet Killian provided or staring at the city from the window, feeling alienated from her own life. One night, Isabella couldn't sleep. Her mind was too full. She walked into the dark living room, illuminated only by the glitter of city lights. She wasn't alone. Killian was standing there by the window, his figure a dark silhouette against the city's glow. For a long time, they just stood in silence. Finally, it was Isabella who broke it.
Is it all worth it, Killian?
She asked softly, her voice sincere, not accusatory.
This power, this violence, is it worth living like this? Caged?
Killian didn't answer immediately. He took a deep breath.
I used to think so.
He said, his voice hoarse.
When my parents died, this business fell to me. I was so young. My only thought then was Siobhan. I swore I would do anything so she would never know fear or want.
He turned to Isabella, and in the darkness, she could see the vulnerability in his eyes.
All of this,
He said, gesturing to the luxurious penthouse around them,
was never about power for myself. It was about building a fortress that no one could ever penetrate, so she would be safe inside.
He smiled bitterly.
Ironic, isn't it? I built a fortress to protect her, but I completely failed to protect you. Instead, I dragged you right into the same danger.
The confession made Isabella's heart ache. For the first time, she didn't see a mob boss or an intimidating man. She saw a man shaped by tragedy and driven by a desperate love.
You didn't fail to protect her.
Isabella whispered.
Siobhan is safe and she adores you. She is the proof of your success.
The gentleness in Isabella's voice seemed to surprise Killian. The silence that fell over them again now felt different, no longer awkward, but filled with a new, fragile understanding.
I will get you out of this, Isabella.
Killian said earnestly.
I don't know how yet, but I promise you.
Isabella returned to her room that night feeling more confused than ever. Hating the monster was easy, but empathizing with the man behind the monster's mask, that felt far more complicated, and far more dangerous for a heart that was already in too deep. The late-night conversation changed everything. The awkward silence between Isabella and Killian melted away, replaced by a careful understanding. They were still prisoners of the situation, but now they were prisoners sharing the same cell, no longer a warden and an inmate. The next morning, when Isabella entered the kitchen, Killian was already there, making coffee. He handed a cup to Isabella without being asked.
Any developments?
Isabella asked, accepting the cup. It was the first question she had asked that directly concerned Killian's world.
My men are working.
Killian replied.
Moretti is moving quietly, like a snake waiting for the right time to strike. But for now, you're safe here.
Safe.
Isabella repeated softly. The word sounded foreign. To fill the seemingly endless time, Isabella began to explore the penthouse, with unspoken boundaries, of course. One afternoon, she found a room she had never entered before, Killian's private library. Dark wood shelves soared to the ceiling, filled with old, valuable-looking leather-bound books. The air smelled of wood and old paper. It was a place of tranquility, a stark contrast to its owner,
I didn't expect you to have a place like this.
Isabella said when Killian found her browse the titles.
Every monster needs a hiding place.
Killian replied, leaning against the doorway.
This is mine.
He stepped inside and pointed to a small table in the corner, upon which sat a beautiful marble chessboard.
Know how to play?
Isabella nodded.
My father taught me.
Good.
Killian said with a faint smile.
To pass the time.
Their chess games became a new ritual. Over the 64-square board, they found a new way to communicate. The game was a metaphor for their relationship, a dance between attack and defense, strategy and sacrifice.
You play too defensively, Doctor.
Killian said as he managed to take one of Isabella's rooks.
And you're too reckless.
Isabella retorted, as her knight put Killian's king in check. In between moves, they talked. About trivial things, movies they liked, music they hated. For a moment, they could forget who they really were and just be two people enjoying a game. The tension between them softened, transforming from fear into a playful flirtation. One day, in the middle of a heated game, Killian deliberately sacrificed his rook to protect his queen from Isabella's attack.
A strange move.
Isabella commented.
You're sacrificing a strong defense.
Killian looked at her, his eyes intense.
The queen is the most powerful piece on the board,
He said softly.
It would be foolish not to protect her at all costs.
Isabella's heart fluttered at the double meaning in his sentence. Before she could respond, the library door opened. A sturdy, serious-faced man, whom Isabella recognized as Killian's top lieutenant, Finn, entered hastily.
Boss, we have a problem.
Finn said in a low voice, glancing awkwardly at Isabella.
The shipment at Pier 7. Moretti's people are there.
Instantly, the atmosphere changed. The man sitting across from Isabella, who seconds ago was smiling over a chess game, had vanished. He was replaced by the cold, focused Mafia leader.
I'll be there,
Killian said to Finn. Then he stood up and looked at Isabella. His face was once again an expressionless mask.
It seems our game will have to wait.
He turned to leave, but paused for a moment at the door.
Stay inside. Don't go anywhere.
The warning was a harsh reminder. Their pleasant game was just an illusion. The peaceful moments they stole were just a brief interlude. Isabella stared at the half-finished chessboard. She might have won the game on the board, but she realized that in the real game, she wasn't the protected queen. She was the prize being fought over, and the real storm was just about to begin. After Killian and Finn left, the penthouse that had begun to feel like a sanctuary now reverted to being a silent, gilded cage. Isabella paced the main living area, her gaze continually returning to the unfinished chess game. Every minute that passed felt like an hour. The silence was heavy, filled with a sense of foreboding. To calm herself, she decided to check on Siobhan. She found the girl reading in her bed, looking much healthier.
Killian's gone.
Siobhan asked, her tone slightly anxious.
He had some business to attend to.
Isabella replied, trying to sound as calm as possible.
He'll be back soon.
Suddenly, from the front of the penthouse came the sound of a commotion. A loud thud, followed by a muffled shout. Isabella and Siobhan looked at each other, their eyes wide with shock and fear. Isabella's instincts immediately took over. She ran to Siobhan's bedroom door and locked it.
Stay behind me and don't make a sound,
Isabella whispered, grabbing a heavy table lamp. The only thing she could use as a weapon. The sounds of the fight outside were brief and brutal. Then silence. The silence was far more terrifying than the sounds of the struggle itself. A few moments later, they heard heavy, steady footsteps approaching the room. The doorknob turned, trying to open. Locked. A moment of silence. Then a loud crash as the door was kicked open. Isabella stood trembling in front of a terrified Siobhan, raising the table lamp with shaky hands. But the sight before her made her freeze. It wasn't Killian's men standing there. It was Marco Moretti. He stood calmly in the ruined doorway, his suit still impeccably neat. Behind him, several of his cold-faced men stood tall. One of them was the guard who was supposed to be stationed out front. His eyes stared blankly at the floor. A traitor.
Dr. Rossi,
Moretti greeted with a thin smile, as if they were meeting at a social event.
my apologies for all the commotion. We've come to pick you up.
Get out of here.
Isabella hissed, her body a shield for Siobhan. Moretti glanced at the frightened Siobhan.
Oh, we have no business with this sweet girl,
he said.
Although I must admit our target was O'Connell's weakness, and it turns out he has two.
His eyes returned to Isabella.
But you, Doctor, are far more valuable to us right now.
I'm not going anywhere with you,
Isabella said firmly. Moretti sighed with an expression of feigned disappointment.
Actually, you are. One of my business associates has just had an accident. We require the expertise of a doctor who can keep a secret.
As Moretti's men stepped forward, Isabella swung the lamp. But her movement was easily stopped. One of the men grabbed her wrist roughly. To force Isabella's compliance, another man moved and grabbed Siobhan's arm. The girl screamed in terror. That scream was the trigger for Isabella. All her resistance vanished, replaced by the instinct to protect.
Fine,
she yelled.
Fine, I'll go. Let her go. Don't touch her.
The man released Siobhan. Moretti smiled with satisfaction.
I knew you were an intelligent woman, Doctor. Do.
Two men took Isabella's arms and pulled her out of the room. The last thing she saw was Siobhan's tear-streaked face and several of Killian's guards lying, unconscious on the floor of the main living area. She was led into the private elevator, its steel doors closing, separating her from the gilded cage. As the elevator descended, carrying Isabella towards an unknown fate at the hands of Killian's sworn enemy, she knew one thing for certain. The chess game was over. She had been captured. Killian returned to the penthouse as dawn was breaking. His small victory at the docks felt hollow and meaningless as he stepped inside and saw the destruction in his home. The main living area was a mess. Some of his loyal men were being tended to by others, and his sister's bedroom door was destroyed. A coldness more piercing than any night wind ran through him. He found Siobhan in the library, wrapped in a blanket and being comforted by Mrs. Gable. The girl ran into her brother's arms, her body trembling with sobs.
They took her, Killian.
She wept.
Moretti's men. They took Isabella.
Killian O'Connell's world narrowed to a single burning focal point. Rage. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger, but a cold, silent, and deadly one. He calmed his sister with a tight embrace, but his eyes staring into the distance looked like chips of ice. The worried man and loving brother had vanished, replaced by the apex predator of the O'Connell crew. He handed Siobhan over to Mrs. Gable and walked to the main living area, where the traitor had been tied to a chair.
Where is she?
Killian asked, his voice low yet echoing in the tense room. The traitor just shook his head with a defiant look. Killian signaled to Finn.
Find out.
Killian didn't need to watch the process. He turned and began giving orders. Every lieutenant was summoned. Every soldier was put on alert. His entire network of informants was activated. The message was simple. Comb every inch of this city. Burn down all of Moretti's hideouts if you have to. Find her. As he was organizing his forces, Finn returned, his face pale.
He talked. Boss, an old wine cellar under one of Moretti's restaurants in the industrial district?
Killian's eyes glinted.
Gather everyone.
He commanded.
We're going to bring that place down.
Isabella was pushed into a cold, damp room. The air smelled of wet earth and sour wine. She was in an underground wine cellar, racks of dusty bottles a silent witness to her captivity. In the middle of the room, on a makeshift cot, lay a man groaning in pain, his abdomen wrapped in a blood-soaked bandage. Marco Moretti stood beside him.
As you can see, Doctor,
Moretti said.
My brother was a bit careless. He needs professional help.
This needs a hospital, not a wine cellar,
Isabella replied, trying to keep her voice steady.
Unfortunately, hospitals ask too many questions.
Moretti countered.
You will handle it here, now. Save him and you might see the sunrise. Fail, and you'll be buried with him behind those racks.
Isabella swallowed hard. Then her doctor's instincts took over. This was her only power here.
I need supplies,
she said firmly.
Isopropyl alcohol, sterile bandages, surgical thread, a broad-spectrum antibiotic like cefotaxime and analgesics, morphine, if you have it.
Moretti seemed impressed by her composure. He ordered his men to get everything, Isabella requested from a medical kit. They had already prepared. As she worked, Isabella's brain spun faster than her hands. She couldn't fight, but she could think. She cleaned the wound, restitching it with a steady hand. Her patient had a high fever from infection.
The infection is severe,
She told Moretti.
He needs a large dose of antibiotics, but there's a risk. A patient with sepsis like this could go into anaphylactic shock from the medication. We need a precaution.
What is it?
Moretti asked impatiently.
Epinephrine.
Isabella replied.
1 full injection. Prepare it in a syringe and place it near me. If his breathing stops, I'll have to inject it directly into his heart within seconds.
Moretti, not understanding the medical terms, ordered his men to comply. They prepared a large syringe filled with a clear liquid and placed it on Isabella's equipment tray. Moretti didn't know that. Epinephrine injected into a healthy person could cause a sudden heart attack, extreme panic, and temporary paralysis. It wouldn't kill, but it would create the perfect chaos. Isabella picked up the syringe with the antibiotic, but in her pocket, she could feel the coldness of another syringe filled with epinephrine, waiting for the right moment. She glanced at the guard standing closest to her. On the other side of the city, a convoy of black cars sped silently through the night. In the lead car, Killian was loading the magazine of his rifle. His eyes were fixed straight ahead. Isabella raised the antibiotic syringe towards her patient, while her other hand was ready in her pocket. The game was about to end. Inside the cold wine cellar, time seemed to slow down. Isabella could feel her own heartbeat in her ears. Across the room, Marco Moretti watched her like a hawk, while his men stood guard. Outside, in the darkness of the night, Killian O'Connell gave his final command.
On my mark.
Killian whispered into his communicator.
We go in fast and hard.
Inside, Isabella took a deep breath. This was it. Holding the tray of her equipment, she walked towards the patient's cot. As she passed the nearest guard, she deliberately tripped, stumbling and dropping the tray with a loud clatter.
Sorry. Oh my God, I tripped,
she said with feigned panic. In the split second of chaos as everyone was startled, Isabella, who was crouching as if to pick up her tools, jabbed the syringe of epinephrine she had been holding into the guard's thigh. Her movement was swift, concealed by her own body.
Help me clean this up.
Moretti snapped at his other men. A few seconds later, as Isabella stood back up, the effects began. The guard she had stabbed suddenly gasped. His eyes bulged, his hands clutching his chest. He dropped to his knees, his body trembling violently from a racing heart.
What's happening to him?
Moretti yelled, his attention now completely diverted. That was the signal. Outside, Killian heard the sounds of commotion from within.
Go now!
A deafening explosion destroyed the main cellar door. The assault came like a tidal wave, fast, brutal, and inevitable. Gunshots erupted, filling the air with flashes of light and echoes that bounced between the wine racks. In the midst of the chaos, Isabella reacted. She pushed a tall wine rack with all her might. Hundreds of bottles shattered across the floor, creating a makeshift barricade and a distracting noise. She pulled the semi-conscious body of Moretti's patient from the cot, using him as a human shield as she crawled for cover behind large wooden barrels. Marco Moretti roared in anger, trapped between trying to save his brother and fighting off the onslaught from O'Connell's crew. The cellar door was kicked open. In the doorway stood Killian O'Connell. He was no longer in a suit but in all-black tactical gear, a pistol in his hand. His ice-cold eyes immediately found Isabella hiding behind the barrels. For a moment, the violent world around them seemed to vanish. Their gazes met, a wordless acknowledgement.
O'Connell!
Moretti shouted, now realizing his game was over. He grabbed Isabella, pulling her to her feet and pressing a gun to her head.
One more step and your precious doctor dies.
But Killian was not alone. Suddenly, another gunshot rang out from a different angle. Finn, who had entered through a ventilation shaft, shot the arm Moretti was holding the gun with. The pistol clattered to the floor. Moretti roared in pain. Killian wasted no time. He lunged forward, pulling Isabella from Moretti's grasp and pushing her behind his shielding body. His other men quickly subdued Moretti and the rest of his crew. The fight was over in less than 5 minutes. Killian, still in combat mode, turned and held Isabella's arms, checking her for injuries.
It's over,
he said, his voice hoarse with adrenaline.
You're safe.
He pulled her out of the ruined wine cellar, past the debris and fallen bodies. The cold night air felt like a slap to the face, smelling of gunpowder and a bitter victory. Killian pushed her into the back seat of his waiting car. As Isabella sat, breathless and trembling, she looked at the man beside her. The man who had just torn down a part of the city for her. She no longer knew if she was looking at her savior, or the man who had made her the reason for a war. The rescue was over, but in Killian's eyes, still burning with rage, Isabella knew their war had just begun. The journey back to the penthouse was shrouded in a heavy silence. The adrenaline from the fight had subsided, leaving Isabella with a bone-deep weariness and a tremor she couldn't control. She glanced at Killian beside her. He stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, but the hand gripping the steering wheel showed his knuckles white. He wasn't angry. He was reining in a much deeper emotion. When they arrived, Siobhan and Mrs. Gable greeted them at the door with tears of relief. Siobhan hugged Isabella tightly.
I was so scared,
she whispered. Holding the girl, Isabella felt a sliver of warmth amidst the chaos in her heart. After Siobhan had calmed down and was resting in her room, Isabella and Killian were finally left alone in the main living area. The unfinished chessboard still lay on the table, a relic from a world that felt like a century ago. Killian approached her, his movements careful as if Isabella were a bird that might fly away at any moment. He noticed a small scratch on Isabella's arm from when she was pulled by Moretti. Without a word, he retrieved the first aid kit, gently cleaned the wound and applied a bandage. His touch was no longer demanding or teasing, but filled with regret.
This should never have happened,
Killian whispered, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion.
I'm sorry, Isabella. I've brought you to hell.
Isabella just looked at him, not knowing what to say.
He won't stop,
Killian continued, looking directly into Isabella's eyes.
Moretti has shown his cards. As long as you're in this city, as long as there's any chance he can connect you to me, you will always be a target. He knows how to hurt me now.
He took a deep breath, preparing himself to say the most difficult words.
But there is a way out. For you. I can arrange everything.
He said in a forced, flat voice.
A new identity. Passport, bank account with enough funds for a lifetime. A place in Vienna, or maybe on the Italian coast. Wherever you want. A place where no one has ever heard the name O'Connell or Moretti. You can start a new life. Open a private practice, have the safe, normal life you're supposed to have.
He was offering an escape, a freedom. This was his penance, his greatest sacrifice, letting her go to keep her safe. Isabella listened in silence, letting the offer sink in. She thought of her old life, her quiet apartment, her busy days at the hospital. A life that was safe, orderly, and predictable. She could have it all back. Then she thought about the past few weeks. The terror, the fear, and the violence. But also about the late-night chess games. About seeing the vulnerable side of a man everyone feared. About Siobhan's laughter. About the searing kiss that made her feel alive for the first time. That safe life felt empty now. Pale and colorless. She had seen the world in sharp, vivid colors, both beautiful and terrible. She had seen Killian. And she realized with a terrifying certainty that she had fallen in love with the whole man. The monster. The brother, the leader, and the man who was looking at her now as if letting her go would shatter his soul.
And you?
Isabella asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Killian looked confused.
Me? That doesn't matter.
It matters to me,
Isabella said. She did something she never thought she would do. She reached out and took Killian's hand. I don't want to run, Killian.
I don't want a new identity in Vienna.
She looked straight into Killian's surprised eyes.
I want this life. With all its chaos, I choose you.
Killian stared at her, frozen, as silence enveloped him. In his tired eyes, a nearly extinguished glimmer of hope began to glow. He had offered the doctor her freedom, but instead, the doctor had chosen his gilded cage. Had chosen him, and in that choice, they both found a completely new kind of freedom. Isabella's words hung in the tense air between them.
I choose you.
For a moment, Killian just stared at her, as if unable to process what he had just heard. In his eyes, usually full of caution and control, Isabella saw something she had never seen before. Total vulnerability. The man accustomed to being abandoned and betrayed, who had built a fortress around his heart, was now faced with an unconditional loyalty. Slowly, as if afraid Isabella would disappear if he moved too quickly, Killian stepped forward. He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs gently wiping away tears Isabella hadn't realized had fallen.
You don't know what you're asking for,
he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion.
I do,
Isabella answered, looking straight into his eyes with a newfound conviction.
I'm choosing this path with my eyes wide open, Killian. I'm choosing you with all the danger and darkness that comes with it.
Killian finally surrendered. He pulled Isabella into a tight, desperate embrace. It wasn't a passionate hug, but the hug of a man who was drowning and had just found his life raft. In the luxury of the penthouse that had become their cage, they finally found true freedom in the choice to belong to each other. 3 months later, the clinic wasn't large, but it was bright and modern. Located in a quiet neighborhood, it was named the Siobhan Rossi Community Clinic, a name that combined their past with the future they were trying to build. Isabella stood near the entrance, greeting guests at their small opening event. She wore her white doctor's coat again, not as armor, but as a badge of pride. After the incident, Killian, using his legitimate resources, had fully funded the project. This was Isabella's way of continuing to be a healer, but on her own terms, in a safe place. Across the room, she saw Killian talking to one of the investors. He looked more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He still ran his empire, but his focus had shifted. He delegated more of the street affairs to Finn, while he concentrated on building businesses. He could leave to Siobhan one day and perhaps to his own children. Siobhan, now healthy and cheerful, was laughing with Mrs. Gable near the drink table. Some of Killian's most trusted men stood silently in the corners of the room, disguised as guests, their presence a subtle reminder that their old world was never truly far away. Killian caught Isabella's gaze from across the room. He smiled, a genuine smile that still made Isabella's heart flutter, then walked over to her.
You look happy, Dr. Rossi,
he said softly for her ears only.
I am happy,
Isabella replied, slipping her arm into his.
Look at what we've built together.
Killian looked around the room, at the patients from the neighborhood, who came to thank them, at Siobhan laughing, at Isabella glowing by his side.
This isn't an easy world, Isabella,
he admitted, his tone serious.
Moretti is in prison now, but there will always be another Moretti.
I know,
Isabella said. She stood on her tiptoes and gave him a brief kiss on the cheek.
I was never looking for easy, Killian.
She looked at him, love and strength radiating from her eyes.
I was just looking for someone worth all the trouble.
Killian squeezed her hand tightly. Standing side by side, they looked out at the room full of new life. The road ahead of them might still be filled with shadows and danger. But for the first time, they wouldn't face it alone. They would face it together, as a team, as a family, and that was more than enough. That night, the rain fell softly outside, washing over the large windows that displayed a tapestry of city lights. Isabella was curled up in the corner of a comfortable sofa, reading a novel while Killian stood by the window, gazing at the cityscape, but his mind was not there. His mind was in that room, on the woman who had turned his fortress into a home. The silence between them was no longer an awkward silence, but a comfortable one. He walked over to the sofa and sat beside Isabella, gently taking the book from her hands and placing it on the table.
Hey,
Isabella protested with a laugh. Shh, Killian whispered, then pulled Isabella to lean against his chest.
Just for a moment.
Isabella relaxed in his embrace, her head resting on his chest. They sat in silence for a few moments, just listening to the sound of the rain and each other's heartbeats.
I like this quiet,
Killian began, his voice low and deep.
but sometimes...
Isabella looked up at him.
Sometimes what?
Killian looked around the spacious, luxurious, and silent main room.
Sometimes this place feels too quiet,
He admitted. His eyes returned to Isabella, this time with a soft and slightly hesitant look, an expression that still fascinated Isabella.
A place this big.
he continued.
It feels strange for just the two of us.
He paused for a moment as if gathering courage.
It seems like it would be more fitting if there was the sound of laughter in these hallways. Maybe the sound of little footsteps trying to hide behind the sofa.
Isabella was stunned. Her heart stopped for a moment. Hearing those words from Killian, the man who lived in danger, whose world was filled with cautious silence and firm commands, was the most shocking yet most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Her eyes welled up with emotion. She smiled, a smile wet with happy tears.
Oh, really?
She teased in a hoarse voice.
So, the feared Mr. O'Connell now wants to be bothered by noisy little kids.
Killian let out a soft laugh, a sound of relief and happiness.
I didn't say I wanted to be bothered.
He replied, wiping the tears on Isabella's cheek with his thumb.
Oh, I said this place would feel more fitting.
I'm not sure if you're ready for sleepless nights and changing diapers, boss.
Isabella continued, her playful tone returning. Killian pulled her closer, kissing her forehead gently.
To build a family with you, Dr. Rossi,
he whispered earnestly.
I am ready to face any war, including the war against diapers in the middle of the night.
Isabella laughed freely, a laugh that filled the entire room, banishing the silence forever. She looked at the man before her, her savior, her lover, and now, the man who dreamed of the same future as her. In the midst of their dangerous world, inside the gilded cage that had now become their home, they were no longer just whispering about ceasefires or the next battle. They began to whisper about the future, and that was the sweetest promise of all.